Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Alfred Hitchcock Presents review. Today it is Season 1, Episode 6, Salvage, starring Gene Barry as Dan and Nancy Gates as Lois. And I have to say, this is a good, solid episode. I believe it is worth seeing. It probably has one subplot too many, but this episode goes into some interesting places for the time that this was made. So, we start in a bar with one of our lead characters, Lois, and she's very nervous. She goes to talk to the bartender, and she's trying to find out some information about a man named Dan, and we find out that Lois was involved with Dan's brother, Richie, and that basically Dan took the rap for him on some kind of charge, but while he was in prison, the brother Richie got into more trouble, in part thanks to Lois, and then Lois basically talked or gave away information that got Richie into trouble. So now Dan is coming out of prison, and she's very concerned there will be retaliation against her. So, kind of a complex and interesting story for a half-hour format. Maybe a little bit too complex, I would argue, but it's handled pretty well for the most part. So, we go to the next scene, and Lois goes to a man named Tim, another guy she was involved with, apparently, and she wants help from him, and he offers her money to leave town. But she basically says that everything she did was for Tim, so we can see that there's some shadiness behind what her motivations were. So she basically leaves, and she says she has nowhere to go. So in the next scene, Lois is at home, and Dan comes along, and he's acting pretty mad at first. He tells her to beg, basically, so that he doesn't do away with her, and she says she has nothing, and she doesn't really care, and they talk some more, and she admits that she's responsible for what happened to his brother, and he's actually disturbed by this. He kind of changes his attitude. He says he expected her to plead and beg to be saved, and he says maybe he was wrong about her. Maybe she's different than he thought. And he says he can't really do away with her now, which is kind of strange because he almost feels like he'd be kind of doing her a favor. This whole scene's kind of odd, but it works pretty well in the context of the episode. So then he comes up with this plan. He says, I need to go legit, so when they check in on me, I'll be doing something respectable. And he says he wants to put up the money for our business, and he finds out that formerly she made dresses, so he says, we'll make a dress shop and you can run it and I'll put in the money and we'll be partners. And Lois agrees to this, but she seems very unsure about it. As we will find out later, she should have been even more unsure about it. So we go to the next scene, which is basically the second half of the episode, and Lois is setting up this dress shop, and she looks pretty happy, and Dan visits, and she wants to know how she can thank him, and he says, just worry about making the business successful, basically. So then Dan goes to visit Lou, who is the bartender from the beginning of the episode, and we find out that some of Richie's friends are upset about him going into business with this lady, which is understandable, and Dan basically wants a loan to get more money to advertise for the shop, and then this man comes in. I think Dan calls him Shorty, and he insults Dan, and this is basically just to establish what we already know, that some of the friends are upset, but this subplot doesn't go anywhere, and this scene just seemed kind of pointless. I don't know if it was thrown in to fill time or what, but this is what I meant about maybe one too many subplots. Not really sure why this is here, but I guess it's fine. It doesn't take up too much time. So we go to another scene with Dan and Lois dancing. I'm not sure where they are, but they're at some kind of dance, and he says all he wants is for her to be happy, and we'll find out later. It's pretty interesting, and she, at this point, tells Dan, I'm sorry, I have to be honest with you because lying didn't get me anywhere. She's still worried about having Tim. That's the only guy she wants. I'm not really sure why. Tim isn't established as anything great, but whatever, I'll just go with it. So Dan goes to visit Tim, and what's odd is that he keeps calling him Grady, and I'm guessing this is Tim's last name. I'm not sure why they didn't just use Tim through the whole episode, but basically he wants Tim to marry Lois at this point to make her happy. We're not really sure why yet, although I figured it out. I thought this was maybe a little bit too predictable. Again, one of those things where Dan has got to be up to something more than this at this point. So now we go to the last scene where Dan and Lois are in the dress shop, and Lois is really happy. She feels good. It seems that Tim is going to marry her, so Dan's plan has worked, and he said he feels good. So Lois now basically acts like she has hope and a reason to live. And when Dan asks her how happy she is, she says basically she's as happy as she's ever been. So Dan pulls out a gun and he basically does her in. So his plan was kind of to make her happy first and give her a reason to live, and then to do her in just like his brother. Kind of a strange logic there, but it works in the context of the episode. And I have to say, this episode's a little bit all over the place, but it goes to some interesting places, especially for a television show in the 50s, and it's kind of dark as well. Definitely a darker ending in tone that works pretty well and holds up. So just kind of an interesting episode, and I give Salvage a 3 out of 5. An episode I would recommend watching once. It's kind of different and kind of interesting, so a 3 out of 5 for Salvage, and as always, thanks for watching.